The two main problems in photography today are sort of digital manipulation in post-production and veracity of images that are in reality legitimate representations of an event, but they may or may not be the event that the audience is being told they are. Or something about the caption, another sort of very common way in which images are misleading is not the image itself, but the text accompanying the image. And again, post-production is another huge problem, I think, in image veracity today.
And you talk about the power of photo. Could you tell?
Sure. Yesterday in keynote workshop, we talked a lot about the power of photo. I think, fundamentally, the internet and mobiles are a visual environment. And the foundational sort of element of that is the photograph. Photographs are extraordinarily powerful. There's the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But photographs can cross cultures because you don't need to share a written or verbal language. You don't even need to be literate to understand an image. Images have an extraordinary capacity to evoke human emotion. They're extremely powerful. Therefore, they can be extremely loaded in terms of what's being represented.
And you tell me before that about color of photo.
Sure. One of the big challenges now, as more and more photographers and amateur photographers and even reporters at news organizations, as they use more and more mobiles, as the mobiles become more sophisticated, and most mobiles are not designed for journalists, they're designed for consumers. And consumers want augmented colors. Consumers want features built into the phone that can change where the appearance of where lighting's coming from, or in the case of mobile video, change the speed of a video. All those things are problematic for journalists because our fundamental compact with our audience is what I am showing you in this picture is the event that actually happened. And that is true of how color is represented. It's true of where the light appears to be coming from. And the argument is very much like, look, if your audience can't trust you on these small things about how color is represented, lighting direction, then why should they trust you on the very large things, particularly around controversial topics of what you're trying to represent with those photos?
And could you give some recommendations for?
I think one of the challenges for photographers now is, it's so competitive and there's such pressure to produce extraordinary images, and often your competition is as much commercial outlets as other journalists, and those commercial outlets don't have the same constraints journalists do. So really, to avoid that pressure, to begin to manipulate your images by, it's so easy now just to Photoshop that little unwanted hand out of your image. Don't do it. It's so easy to use HDR or other tools to dramatically enhance color. Don't do those things. So if you are a mobile user in particular, to try and set it in manual as much as you can, or in some cases use apps external to the native apps that allow you to override some of these increasingly powerful features in your phone that are augmenting your imagery.
And your argument is for auditorial, or how they should accept photos and read the news?
So I just did, a few months ago actually, a workshop with some large Philadelphia newspapers, not far from New York where I live. And the photo editors were there, and I did the workshops because, like so many news organizations, increasingly they're asking reporters to take pictures. And I was talking about HDR, which is high dynamic range, so it'll enhance the color of an image. And the photo editors who was there were telling their reporters to turn it off. So I think one of the things that news organizations can do to protect editorial sensibilities is have written guidelines, have clear standards for your photographers or for your reporters who are using cameras so that they understand their technology a little better. Because surprisingly, photographers, but even reporters, they may not even know what HDR is. They may not even be aware that their phones are doing these things, but their audience is going to know. So I think having clear policies is a big part for news organizations, large and small, domestic, international, to begin to address this problem of misrepresentation through imagery.
And doing this, so there is a word for the visual literacy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a term?
Visual literacy, yes. So visual literacy is the idea that, visual literacy is the idea that people have a more sophisticated understanding of the images they're looking at. When we talk about literacy or high rates of literacy, we're talking about, in terms of language, we're talking about people who can read and write, or people who can read or write at a higher level of diction. You know, more sophisticated ideas, more sophisticated grammar. I think the same applies to photography. We need to encourage greater visual literacy. So people are asking critical questions, so they understand when they look at an image a little bit more about how that image was constructed and how the journalists behind that image, the choices they were making about how an event should be represented.
Thank you. Do you have questions?
Regarding visual literacy, how much in common does it have with media literacy?
I think, you know, visual literacy is a subset of this much larger issue of media literacy. And online, which is so fundamentally a visual environment, and because photographs are so charged, and because photographs don't require the same commitment, if I'm going to read an article, that's going to take more time. I look at an image and I make an impression about the event instantaneously with that image, particularly if, along with perhaps a misleading headline or caption. So I think visual literacy is a key component to media literacy more broadly.
Okay, and are there any tools that people can use in order to aid their literacy?
Yeah, there are, this is not my area of expertise, but there are a variety of, Sam was talking about this, of online tools so that you can retro-engineer pictures. There are a couple sites now, even for GIFs and animations that I do, that will sort of show you, you know, particularly because GIFs and animations are hugely popular online. They're playing a much larger role in journalism, in traditional media, but a lot of times where GIFs originate are in sort of the darker corners of the internet. So there are now places that can go through and sort of, it's called Know Your Memes, and it's a website you can go, and if the history of a particular meme or animation is known, it will track it back in time. Where did it come from? Who's the producer? What were some of the original applications of this meme? The other thing I recommend to people, increasingly in social media, we tend to, and the links will push us in this direction on social sites, towards other like-minded people on particular issues. It is, and I think, essential, but just a plain good idea, if you are a left-leaning person and all your news sources are left-leaning, take some time, go see what the other side's saying. And that may help you form a fuller, more balanced idea of the concerns behind stories, particularly complicated issues or controversial issues.
Я просто переведешь, да, лучше. Проблема визуальной журналистики не отвечает, а теперь реально, вот, я знаю, что он работал в Центральной Азии, вот, Центральная Азия и Америка, вот, наши проблемы общие или они разнятся?
How does photojournalism differ by geography?
I know that you work in Central Asia.
Yeah.
And Central Asia and USA, and it's the same problem we have, or what could you say about our auditoria of USA and Central Asia?
Yeah. I'm not, and you know, you can decide whether to use this. I'm not that familiar with Central Asia, but my assumption is that there's still sort of a lot of sort of Russian and Chinese influence here. And these are traditionally two totalitarian governments that did not have a legacy of press freedom. So I think in the United States, where free press is sort of built into the Constitution, there's a greater expectation and more of a history of veracity and independence in the media. In this region, it's not as developed. I don't get the sense that there's the same expectation or very often the same outrage at the offenses. But that's changing. And I think, although it's sort of a difficult period, one of the positive things to come out of this social media conversation about media literacy is perhaps greater expectations of an independent and accurate press in this region.
And and the last questions. Could you share with us an interesting story in your professional life, maybe связанное regarding that? Связанное с connecting to media literacy and fake or
Sure. This is, and this is one I tell you. Could tell me if you want another one. So this was several years ago. I was in Spain, and at the time there had been laws that required that Roma children, gypsies, had to go to school, right? And this was new. And there was a Roma community outside of a very wealthy community in northern Spain. So when the Roma kids went to the school where these wealthy Spanish children went to school, the Spanish kids stopped going. Their parents took them out of the school. So this was a big story. So I take what I thought was a really great picture of a little girl alone in a classroom because she was Roma, because all the other students weren't there. She was Roma, but she had blonde hair. So I submitted it to the editor, and he got back to me and said, well, can't you find somebody who looks a little more Roma? Which I thought was sort of fascinating. And I was a little annoyed, and I said, well, what does that mean? And his own stereotypes played, even as an editor, played into what his expectations this picture should look like. And my belief is our role is to confound exactly that.
And интересная история, let's go. Какой был этот фестиваль?
So what can we conclude from this?
So I think, well, first, I think one of the trends now in journalism that we talk a lot about in the United States that is very, very positive, but a difficult transition is journalism that's more inclusive, right? Particularly more inclusive of women, more inclusive of ethnic diversity. This is long enough ago so that if American news organizations wanted pictures out of the Middle East or wanted pictures from northern Spain or of Native American communities, they would send me. One of the things that's happening now is they're going to find Native American photographers. They're going to find photographers from that nation or community or gender or ethnic group, and I think that's a very positive thing. But it's a change. And it's a difficult thing to learn, and I think it's difficult for older editors, and I'm now an older editor, and it's difficult for older news organizations to be comfortable with that. But a little discomfort is a positive thing.